The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how you doing?
Pretty good, my friend. How are you?
Not bad. Pretty good week. I mean, I'll be honest, after the Indiana game, I maybe feel a little bit worse than before that because of some of the things that happened that we'll get to in a minute. But since the last time we recorded, 2 wins in a week with not a lot of games. So they won both of those games. So not such a bad week overall as far as the win-loss record.
You take those wins, and yes, there are absolutely some nuts and bolts, so we have to cover that. Could end up being unfortunate about the team, but 36-9, retaining. We talked about them last week, that they were like 3 games ahead of everyone else in the NBA. That remains the case. They just are not losing games. And this week, the potential, Mike, to form some narratives and officially stomp on the throats of Utah Jazz fans everywhere. So I think we'll cover that in the second half of this episode.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fascinating week for the Suns. There's, Donovan Mitchell out, spoiler for the second half of this podcast, but Donovan being out for the first game at least does suck as far as
for sure
testing both teams. I'd like both teams to be tested in this scenario. But, Ayton might not play either. We don't really know. And who knows about these other guys that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the first game that happened this week since the last time we recorded was the Dallas game on TNT. Thank God TNT has Thursday nights back. They were doing Tuesday nights at the beginning of the season. Thursdays felt weird without TNT, I'll be honest. They're back. The Suns were one of the biggest games in the first weeks of them doing this. Suns versus Dallas. The Phoenix Suns have now beaten the Dallas Mavericks 9 times in a row. They just can't beat the Suns no matter what they do. And the Suns on TNT, I think, after Devin Booker having one of the best weeks of his career, come into this game, I think, with the intent on reminding people who the best team in the NBA was. And I'll be honest, it wasn't going well at first. But I think on the national stage, to see the Phoenix Suns take over in the clutch like they have been so many times throughout this season, I think that was the type of thing that people who maybe don't watch the Suns on a regular basis have an opportunity to see exactly what that looks like. And I think everything played off like it was written in a script for the Suns at the end of this game. They just took over at the end and finished off the Dallas Mavericks in what ended up being a really fun game.
It was a really shitty first 3 quarters in that game, followed by just a resurgent Suns team in the fourth quarter that, as you said, took over. But the Mavs came out in that game, and they played the Suns pretty well for a while there. I mean, they had this kind of wonky trap and hedge type scheme that threw the Suns ball handlers off just enough, sort of combined with Phoenix only shot 22% from deep in this entire game. JaVale McGee kind of sucked in this game, too. He didn't close the game for a guy who we definitely have to talk about a lot this week, I think. But, he kind of sucked in that game. So you go into the fourth quarter, and, the offense was just absolutely not clicking. But then they started getting stops. And the extent to which they got some of these stops were amazing, whether it be Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges playing the passing lanes, Biyombo. There's the guy, I teased to it, but we just have to talk about him, Bismack Biyombo, playing really, really well in multiple schemes. He was coming up. He was trapping Dallas Mavericks ball handlers. He was trapping guys like Jalen Brunson on the perimeter, and then the next possession he'd come down with Luka, and he would drop back. Luka would go into the step back 3, and he would come out and contest. He was all over the place, and he was awesome. Really just a defense-first mentality got the Suns back into that game. They were able to generate the transition points, and the right guys took over in the fourth quarter, and that was that. But just the fact that they're able to do it over and over and over again, hard not to have confidence in their ability to, just straight up play playoff-style basketball right now. They are probably, I would say, the best in the league at doing it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the Mavs attacked the Suns defensively in some interesting ways, and even offensively in some interesting ways that did sort of affect them in those first three quarters, but they just turned their defense up to a level that other teams really can't get to outside of, I think, the Golden State Warriors, who are, when they have their defensive units on the floor, they can get up to that level. But I'm not sure they're even going to have that, with Klay Thompson just not... I mean, Gary Payton II's better at defense than Klay Thompson. So
far better, yes.
He's just better. So you can't really have... the combination of Wiggins, Gary Payton, and Draymond was what made that tick. And even Steph, who's been very good this year, is what made that defense work. And who knows if they can do that later. So right now, really, with their best players on the floor, only the Suns can get to that level of defense for extended stretches of time. And that's all it takes, because you can't do that for a whole game. The amount of energy it takes to play that way, you can't do it. And, credit, I think, to Devin Booker, who I think had two good defensive games this week. Dallas, I thought he was really good on defense. In Indiana, where he couldn't buy a bucket, which we'll talk about in a second, he still played tough defense throughout that game. And the Suns need him to do that, because he's getting chased around screens. He's getting attacked on switches. He can't just be lackadaisical on defense. He has to put the effort and energy into it for the Suns to win these games like they did against Dallas, which old Suns teams would have just rolled over and died and lost that game on TNT. And this team, not once through those first three quarters did I think the Suns were going to lose that game. I just had a feeling they would win, because we've seen it over and over and over again, and now the rest of the NBA got to see it. But then they went into Indiana. We'll talk about the Indiana game, too. If you want to talk more about Dallas, feel free. But in the Indiana game, Devin Booker, the bipolar, I think, side of Devin Booker came out here, where he just couldn't hit a bucket. He just goes through these stretches, and I think more this season than last season, he's going through these stretches where he can't hit a bucket. And the rest of the team played really well, whether it be Mikal Bridges having one of his better offensive games so far this year, or we got to talk about him now, Sam. Bismack Biyombo.
Let's fucking talk about him.
Having maybe the best game of his career, because he had his season high, his career high in points, and his career high in assists in the same game in a season that he did not even start the season as an NBA player. And then he goes into this game and has the best game of his career. Really insane.
The short roll god, Bismack Biyombo. I remember, on certain possessions, like after he was up to 4 or 5 assists, Bismack would get it on the short roll. There was one play where he was wide open. He could have just taken the dunk, but he was so excited to get the assist. He wanted to be Jokic that bad. He fired one off into the corner, and they said, take it easy, big fella. Just take the layup, take the dunk. He got a little overexcited, but he has been absolutely magnificent over the past 4 games. I tweeted out earlier today, the Suns' net rating in the 85 minutes with Chris Paul and Bismack Biyombo together on the court. Because it wasn't just the Indiana game where he had 21 points. He finished that Dallas game. This is the only other thing I would say about the Dallas game. He finished that Dallas game. He had clutch buckets. He had a clutch pick and roll possession with Chris Paul.
And one.
2 or 3 minutes left, and one, perfectly executed. Devin Booker comes, sets the ghost screen. Dallas doesn't fall for it. Sometimes it works. In this case, it didn't. But, creating that misdirection, Jay Crowder starts in one corner, empties out the corner, comes to the other side off of like a weak side action, off of a pin down screen. The misdirection is perfect everywhere. Perfectly sets up the Chris Paul pocket pass to Biyombo. Biyombo has a wide open lane, except for the one defender, and he takes the N1, scores. Beautiful basketball, and then obviously Indiana as well. The net rating with Chris Paul and Biyombo on the floor, 85 minutes, is a plus 37.1. That's per 100 possessions. So the other way to read that being in that roughly average NBA game, the Suns, with those two, an offensive rating of 126, a defensive rating, Mike, of 89.
Yeah.
89 points per 100 possessions. I mean, he's been fantastic. There's a couple people have asked me this online, and, I've been hesitant to really answer this or give this any thought publicly, at least, because I don't want... JaVale has had, in some, such a good season. But is there a case for Bismack to kind of become the backup center when DeAndre Ayton comes back? Or is this just a really, really fun stretch that you enjoy it for as long as it lasts?
Or how about even this? With DeAndre Ayton out, Bismack Biyombo should start. And I'm going to just say that full stop. Bismack Biyombo should start. And here's why. Two things. When the Suns are playing pick and pop bigs like they did against Dallas, JaVale likes to sit back. He likes to be in the paint. He doesn't like to play up on guys. And there are times where Biyombo still isn't quite good at that yet either, but he's better at it than JaVale McGee. So you're playing a team like that. They were much better with Biyombo on the floor defensively than they were with JaVale McGee on the floor defensively. And on the other side of that, I feel like we need to maximize the time on the court with Chris Paul and Bismack Biyombo. You're watching that Indiana game. Every time they play together, there was something happening offensively every single time. Because he sets screens hard, he switches his hips well, and he rolls to the basket hard every single time. And he does not miss that. It just happens every time. And with Chris Paul in there, there's angles to get the pass to Bismack that just aren't there with other guys. And he's catching those passes from Chris Paul on a regular basis. And beyond that, he seems to be at the point with the teammates that he has on the Suns where he understands where they're going to be on the floor. So if he catches it on a trap, if there's a guy coming from the corner, he's able to pass it to that guy in the corner right on the money and get them to make shots, whether it be Landry Shamet, Cameron Johnson, JaVale McGee. I think he assisted all three of those guys. Mm-hmm. And, if Devin Booker was making shots, he probably would have assisted him at least once in that Indiana game as well. So I don't know. I just don't really. And also, JaVale just plays better against backup bigs. He looks like a beast against backup bigs. I'm not sure you want him against those starting bigs. I understand the position that Monty is in, that these guys prepare and come off the bench so that they have the opportunities to start when this comes up. But at some point, you got to recognize the chemistry that Chris Paul and Biyombo have, because it's a rare kind of chemistry that just, for him to work like that right away, it doesn't get worse with Chris Paul. It only gets better. It's only going to get better from here.
Chris Paul has chemistry with everyone.
It's true.
I mean,
it's remarkable.
Chris Paul has chemistry with JaVale too, for sure.
With JaVale and of course DeAndre Ayton, even Jalen Smith. But I just think Bismack, the type of stuff that he does is he basically plays exactly like Chris Paul wants a big to play. Because
except for the couple of instances I would point out, Bismack runs a little bit too hard into those screens sometimes. He almost took Chris Paul out.
That's true.
I think he landed, or maybe I think it was JaVale actually who landed on his foot. But there was one time Bismack was setting a screen last night in the Indiana game, and he almost took Chris Paul out. He went the wrong way.
Well, that's what Chris Paul wants, though. They want to be robots that are like physically unbothered by other players on the floor.
No, I know, but there was a point like when the Suns, it was the third quarter, and they still hadn't put the Pacers away last night, and you could tell Chris Paul was more pissed off than usual with kind of the way some of the guys were moving. And, Bismack, he also got in Booker's way at some point. None of this to take away from the fact that he has been completely fucking awesome. But, if Gobert plays, and Gobert is questionable too, you're saying you would rather have Biyombo match the physicality of a guy like Gobert in 2 Jazz games this week.
Yeah.
Versus JaVale.
I don't know that. It's funny with Gobert, and we'll talk about it later too. Offensively, I'm not really worried about him against either one of those guys. They both have the size to contest him. If the Suns are starting Jalen Smith, I think the strength and the size and the offensive rebounds, that'd be a problem with Jalen Smith. But Bismack Biyombo and JaVale McGee, I think both of those guys would be fine. Where I think the Suns would be better against the Jazz with Biyombo on the floor is offensively, because I think Biyombo has been better offensively for the Suns with Chris Paul in at least the more recent stretch than JaVale McGee has. And it's not to say that JaVale McGee does some dumb stuff with the ball sometimes. That's really all it is. Biyombo only sets screens, rolls, and then catches it, and then tries to dunk it, regardless of how far he is away from the basket or if there's anybody else down there. If he makes the right pass, he can make the right pass. JaVale McGee just does a little too much sometimes, and I think you can't really afford to do that against great teams. So, yeah, I think I would start Biyombo if Ayton's not going to play, personally. I know it's not going to happen, I think, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the game, which I think has happened recently, Biyombo has more minutes than JaVale McGee, which is wild that we're even saying this. It's just another time that James Jones has done something similar to Torrey Craig last year, pulling a guy out of nowhere that immediately fits right into this team.
Yeah, and regardless of who becomes the main backup, it just definitely gives you a lot of confidence going forward for the playoffs, knowing that if Ayton went down for any reason, knock on wood he doesn't, but if he did, even just say for a game or two, let's say like that's a better scenario, not that we're talking about a serious injury, but if he takes a hit somewhere, misses a game in the playoffs, you've got two capable guys who can come in and spot start. You're not having to talk about a potential situation where it's someone like Jalen Smith playing heavy minutes at center or something where he's just not ready. You have two vets who are very prepared for the moment, and that is certainly it's just a pleasure to watch them both play right now. Here's a stat for Biyombo. It's a VORP stat. Haven't quoted VORP in a while, so I got to go back to my roots. Did you know that Bismack Biyombo, and for all those who know, VORP is a cumulative stat, which means you accumulate it with the more minutes you play. The more minutes you play, the more opportunities you have to be good at this stat. Bismack has not played many minutes this year. But Bismack Biyombo in 8 games has a higher VORP on the season than Russell Westbrook. That probably doesn't surprise you.
I mean, Westbrook has been a negative.
It probably doesn't surprise you, but
the Lakers also don't maximize him in any way. I want to blame the Lakers.
You would still think the guy with all the points and all the rebounds and all the assists and the steals, and you tally that all up, and even with the turnovers,
that is wild. You
dock him for the turnovers, you dock him for the efficiency. You'd still think it would add up to more than Bismack Biyombo.
Yeah,
it does
that's
not.
A good point.
He also has more than Darren Fox.
Wow.
That's another player. It's hard to compare. It's really hard to compare bigs to guards in this stat. In fact, most of the time, unless you're doing it tongue-in-cheek like I am right now, I would recommend you not do it because bigs are so heavily rewarded for things like rebounding, defensive rebounding, for instance, which just doesn't have as much impact on the game as we'd like to believe. But all of the other stuff for Bismack is real. The blocks are real. The efficiency is real.
Right.
The defensive net rating, that's real. So a lot of the stuff that's going into that stat is real and points to an actual tangible impact that he is absolutely having on the Suns.
Really cool story. I mean, it's actually, I compared it to Torrey Craig, but it's actually most similar to Cameron Payne, who just came to the Suns and just absolutely owned it for a season out of nowhere. And that's exactly what's happening now with Biyombo. And I do think there's a chance that in the playoffs that Biyombo gets minutes over JaVale. Now, we're not talking about necessarily right away in the regular season, but there are certain matchups where if the big has to move a little bit more, I'm actually kind of shocked I'm saying this, that Biyombo is somehow more able to move his feet than anyone, but he's more able to do it than JaVale McGee. And we saw that in the Mavericks game in particular, and we'll see if it holds, right? Because this is a really hot stretch. Players have had hot stretches and cooled down after a while. There's really nothing in here. Like, it's not hot shooting. You know, it doesn't feel like a guy just gets hot from 3 for 2 weeks, and that's what makes it seem like it's unsustainable.
Well,
it doesn't feel like that for Biyombo.
It's not hot shooting in the sense that we all know that Biyombo doesn't have a lot of touch. Like, he's not going to start hitting even 10-foot hook shots or whatever. That's just not his game. I think I've seen him make one of those maybe. But for the most part, it's not his game. He gets layups. I think I said this on the Patreon episode this week. I can't remember. Sometimes I forget now. But just like his hands have surprised me. And that's been one of the most outlier things, I think, in comparing what my expectations were of this guy based on what I've seen and based on what I've heard others say throughout his veteran career versus what I'm actually seeing on the court now. A lot of credit goes to Chris Paul and playing the passing angles right and navigating those windows, but also just, you know, is Bismack going to continue to catch this well?
Right.
Because I was not expecting it at all, and that definitely contributes. I mean, the difference between a guy who is shooting 60-65% on his layups versus 70-75%, the latter of which is what Bismack is doing right now.
Yeah. Dunks,
definitely. Yeah. Can you catch bounce passes? You know, this was a big issue that we talked about. This is an issue we were talking about with DeAndre Ayton for the first 3 years of his career. He's gotten a lot better at it.
Yes.
But just something as basic as, can you catch bounce passes? Don't bobble the pass. Pick it up cleanly, and don't give the defense really an opportunity to react before you rise up, because if they have an opportunity to react, that's when you start to get rattled or you get blocked at the rim or something like that. So that can make a difference over time, and we will see. But for now, looks great.
I mean, the other part is, I don't know that Biyombo's caught a single lob dunk, maybe one or two.
Yeah, not his game.
Yeah, it's just not. It's just not. Chris Paul's not throwing him those passes. And by the way, Chris Paul said that he reached out to Kyle Lowry to ask him about how Biyombo likes to get the ball and stuff like that, which is just absolute catnip for Raptors fans who love when Kyle Lowry gets credit for anything. So good for them on that. That's a win, absolute win for them, and I'm happy for them there. But yeah, I think for Biyombo, it actually works out kind of well for the way that defenses have been playing Chris Paul so far this season, in that if it's not going to be the lob, if he can catch that bounce pass and just attack the basket, Chris Paul can thread that needle, right? He can thread that needle to him and get him the ball on those traps, and then it's just either Biyombo versus a smaller defender with a shooter open in the corner, or it's just Biyombo and the rim wide open, right, which has happened over and over and over again. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of credit goes to Chris Paul, which I think we're going to talk about in the second half of this episode as well. But the other things that happened in this game, not as fun. I'm glad we led off with the fun stuff, specifically in that Indiana game. Cameron Payne fell on his right wrist after getting fouled going for a layup.
Got smacked in the wrist as well on that play.
And fell onto that right wrist, his non-shooting wrist, and he was immediately holding it, left the game shortly after that, did not come back. Have not heard an update yet. I think this afternoon, Sam, we will hear an update. So people listening to this, we're recording this on Sunday, people listening to this will maybe have heard an update so far. I'd be surprised if he played this next game. The other player, Jay Crowder, fell on his left wrist, also his non-shooting wrist, and immediately ran to the locker room.
Yeah.
That's two vital players for the Suns. I'm not going to play this down, but vital players for the Suns as currently constructed. And those players need to be healthy in order for the Suns to make a proper run into the NBA playoffs. I don't know anything about those injuries. I think depending on the severity of them, we're going to have conversations about that, maybe even try and reach out to some people that are more of experts on injuries so we can try to do some good analysis for you guys there. But right now, Jay Crowder, Cameron Payne, probably going to be out for the foreseeable future. I don't know how long. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Cam's is just based on kind of instinct of how they looked. Again, I'm not a medical expert myself. It does seem like people think Cam's is a little bit milder. But you don't know. I mean, a lot of that is just judging from the reaction. Like with Cam, he still got up. He shot his free throw. He missed his free throw. But then he ran up and down the court a few times. You know, he played out the rest of his stint, and then he left the game. Jay instantly ran to the locker room. Which
it could be a hand injury, too, for Jay.
I mean, that one scares me more because Jay's a tough guy. If he thought he could play through it, he would. Yeah. So the fact that he instantly said, nope, something here is wrong, in my opinion, is not a good sign. And, as for what it means for the depth chart, unfortunately, we know exactly what it means, Mike. The Suns' depth chart at those positions specifically is not great.
Those are the ones that we've been trying to solve.
I mean, the issue with having 8 centers is that suddenly when
someone else
gets injured.
It's exactly I mean, you can't put Jalen Smith in there, they might. But you can't put Jalen Smith in there to replace Jay Crowder or Cameron Payne, obviously. But it's just not something you can do. So,
I mean, the Jay Crowder one specifically sucks because your choices are either play Jalen Smith, who you can play there, he's playable at the 4. I will say I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But I would say he's more playable now than I believed him to be a month ago. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. He looked
playable against Indiana, playable against Detroit, not playable against the Jazz.
Not playable for the playoffs. Yeah. I don't think playable for the playoffs, but it is January 23rd, and I don't think the injury we saw from Jay Crowder was 4 to 6 months type recovery time. I don't know. That was I don't know.
I don't know either.
We'll wait for updates.
It's tough because
we'll wait for updates. I think we're talking, just to talk you down from the ledge a little bit, I think we're talking about, even in a bad case, a matter of weeks, not a matter of months, but we'll see.
Yeah.
The point is, you don't want Jalen Smith or Ish Wainwright in that position for all too long. The trade deadline is in 3 weeks, too, by the way.
Yeah.
Does it affect logic or outlook, strategy for the front office? I would hope that they're targeting wings already.
I'll say this right now.
My opinion is on it.
You can't pass the trade deadline with Jalen Smith on your roster. Like, that's just the first part, because we already have 3 centers that are above him in the roster. Monty Williams has talked about him being a center. He told the coaching staff that he's a center and prefers to play at center. You can't just force him to play power forward for the rest of the season, especially because you don't have depth at forward. He has to be gone to step one. And I'm sorry, I like Jalen Smith too, but for the better of his own career, he needs to play at a team that will properly utilize him and take advantage of the skill sets he has. So step one, if you have to cut him cut him because you need to fill that spot with somebody that can play actual minutes for this team if players continue to get injured like this, which, by the way, Cameron Johnson just came back right before this. And we finally had the original intended roster here outside of DeAndre Ayton, and then immediately Jay Crowder goes down. Cameron Johnson's not even quite himself yet, and he's going to have to step into that starting lineup immediately. And then
probably
there's
play
nobody
35,
to play
40
after
minutes.
him.
Yeah.
Step one, Jalen Smith out of here. Don't need that many centers. I mean, I feel bad for Frank Kaminsky, but if he's not going to play the rest of the season, maybe him too. Clear that roster spot because you can't go the rest of the season with that many centers on the roster. Even if you find guys that maybe they're not playable in the playoffs, if they can at least fill in the regular season when injuries like this happen, you got to get them. But yeah, and DeAndre Ayton's still out too. So, we talked about Biyombo. We have him. We got JaVale McGee, so that works out there. But outside of that, I think these are the two types of injuries. We're going to see Elfrid Payton minutes. We saw it. We are. We're going to see it.
You can go, but so the thing is, you can go against the Jazz or against any of these other contenders right now. Like, let's say these three guys are out for all of them for the next 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think that's going to be the case, but let's say they were. I mean, you'll get a lot of Chris Paul. You basically, with your main core rotation, you still have Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and then even toss in Biyombo / JaVale there at center. And I think your top 5 or 6 is really strong. After that, your production falls off a cliff. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be riding those guys hard for 35, 36 minutes each, and the bench minutes are going to start to look really ugly. It sure would be a nice time for Landry Shamet to have a good week.
Yes, that would be great.
A good week
before the
two.
Trade deadline? Yeah, that would be a great time for him to do that.
Can anyone remember when was the last good Landry Shamet game? I've gone back and forth about if I should go after this guy or not, because in the past I've defended him, and I really do think I just said on one of our episodes, again, maybe it was a Patreon episode, I said he's very inoffensive in what he does. But can you remember the last good Landry Shamet game?
Yeah.
Can you remember more than 3 this season? Have there been more than
tough.
3? I remember one of the games I was at with you when I visited Phoenix in November. I think it was against the Hawks. They weren't getting anything on offense, and he was curling around those screens, and he kind of took over for a stretch in the third or fourth quarter. He finished with 16 or 18 points. That was November. And, he's fine. He's been fine. He hit a couple of corner standstill threes last night against Indiana, but there's room for a nice upgrade there if you're willing to go and find one.
I'd say so too. Yeah, I say so too. And I think that James Jones definitely knows that. And at this point, somebody, if Landry Shamet was doing the things that we were sort of promised when he was traded to the team, playmaking, stuff like that, then I think it would be a different scenario as far as Cameron Payne being out for a few games, because then you can make up that playmaking without having to play Elfrid Payton. But at this point, you're going to have to play him. You're just going to have to play him. So that is what it is, and we're going to see that going forward. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about something a little more exciting. I want to make the case for a player for a specific award this season. So we'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, Sam, I have a gripe. I have a gripe with Suns fans, in particular. In that,
can I just say? Can I stop you?
Yes.
Before he goes any further, the views that this man is about to espouse do not represent my views. If you're going to come after him, come after him. Do not come after me. Proceed, Mike. Go.
I've seen way too many Suns fans hesitant to allow Chris Paul into the MVP conversation. Way too many. And I understand why. I think it comes from an insecurity about the way Devin Booker is perceived as far as the entirety of NBA fandom, NBA media, whatever you want to call it. The perception of Devin Booker, that he's, not good or whatever. I don't know. Clearly that should be gone by now, but that's just something that some people have. So I understand why people feel the way they do. But I think that we need to really look at the MVP case for Chris Paul seriously at this point and just consider it. Now, I'm going to start this off by saying Chris Paul is not going to win MVP. He's not going to win it. But, Mikal Bridges is not going to win Defensive Player of the Year either. We've talked a lot about that. Monty Williams might not win Coach of the Year. We talked about that as well. I think it's important for Suns fans to be okay with these guys being in the conversation, and even beyond that, support it, because I think to some extent that insecurity about Devin Booker is causing Suns fans to not really appreciate how good Chris Paul has been this year, because I have a lot of stats here to talk about just to support this case, because what he's doing has been remarkable. I think remarkable at his age, but remarkable at any age for how good the Suns team has been. Now, first of all, I want to ask you before I jump into some of these. At first glance, how do you feel about when Chris Paul's brought up in MVP conversations?
So obviously, I almost regret what I said before you went off there, because now I feel like I look like the bad guy. That was my intention, because you only talked up Chris Paul. Obviously, I feel good about Chris Paul being involved in MVP conversations. Do I think it's realistic? That's another story. But you're dancing around it, and the reason Suns fans, you could call it insecurity, you can call it whatever you want, but the reason it's a touchy subject is because now you need to answer this question. Who's better? Who's the better player in 2022? Is it Chris Paul or Devin Booker? And I think we've avoided this question on this podcast because we've considered it not productive. And I don't think it's productive to team chemistry. I don't think it's something that the Suns players think about at all, for example. But if you're talking about media narratives and who gets to be in that MVP conversation, because a lot of Suns fans want Booker to be in that MVP conversation. A lot of Suns fans say if Ja Morant is leading a 30-win team as its leading scorer, or 27-win team, whatever the Grizzlies are right now, and he's a 25, 26 point per game scorer, why doesn't Devin Booker get to be in that same conversation, even higher up on the ladder, because he averages the same number of points and his team is better? So, I believe you've got all the stats, but
yeah,
what do you believe?
Well,
Is Chris Paul, just answer the question, is Chris Paul a better basketball player than Devin Booker in 2022?
First off, MVP is not about that. And it never has been about that. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge when talking about this conversation. It's never been the best player in the MVP award, because then it just would have gone to LeBron the last 10 seasons or at least before last season, the last 10 seasons before that.
I think, however, you're right, but I do think in the post-LeBron era, there's kind of an identity crisis right now around the league.
Yeah.
There isn't LeBron is great. We all know he's great. We respect him, whatever. He's a top 10 player. But he's not that guy anymore. And so now there's this crisis of faith in the NBA.
It's because people don't like Luka.
No, but
that's the main reason why.
It's not because
they
people
want
don't
it
like
to be
Luka.
Luka. They put all the marketing money into Luka. They wanted the face of the NBA to be Luka Doncic, and it's not gonna be, because too many people dislike the way he plays or like it as a person.
And they put all that up. They put all the marketing money. Actually, I do agree with you there. They put all the marketing money into Luka, and then the following year they followed it up with Zion, and look how that turned out.
Exactly.
But no one knows really. I mean, people will defend whatever their opinion is to the death, but no one really knows who the best player in the NBA is right now. No one really knows.
Because
more than ever,
conversation is bad, I think. That's why.
Okay, but I'm just saying, now more than ever, you can make the case that best player is MVP, because LeBron doesn't exist anymore. And until someone rises up and seizes the identity of officially being the new LeBron James, the unquestioned best player in the league, maybe Giannis can be that.
But there's just no way to do that.
But he hasn't yet.
I think there's just no way to do that. There's no way to know for sure which player is the best player in the NBA, because circumstance, teammates, other things that happen in the NBA, players, schedule, all of that is factored into it. That's why I think the whole conversation of ranking players and deciding who's better than other players is just always constantly flawed. It just never works. It's not.
All right.
And I'm saying that as someone that understands that if we really wanted to have those conversations, we could probably milk it for hours and hours and hours and hours of content going forward.
And believe me, there are plenty of podcasts that do milk it for hours and hours.
Yes.
But let me make a concession to you. Fine, you don't want to talk about best player, that's fine. Why is Chris Paul more valuable to the Phoenix Suns than Devin Booker? And look, before you even start, I think there's a very high chance that you can convince me that that's the case, and I'll come aboard. I could be on your team, but I think a lot of Suns fans need to hear that. So why is he more valuable?
Number one,
why are you firmly believing that opinion.
Number one, consistency. He's more consistent than Devin Booker. We just saw when Devin Booker's great, he's greater. He's one of the best players in the NBA. But we just saw what he was against Indiana. He's not consistent. He's not consistent this season. Like, he is relatively consistent, but as consistent as Chris Paul, not really. And this is a conversation here where I want to say this. What I'm going to tell you about Chris Paul has nothing to do with how good Devin Booker is, because Devin Booker, likely by the end of the season, might be as much in the conversation or more in the conversation than Chris Paul. What I want to say is that talking about Chris Paul and having him in that conversation should not, in fans' minds, take away from Devin Booker. Let's just go over some stats, and then we'll get back to that in a minute. In the modern era, do you know how many players have averaged 10-plus assists with less than 2.5 turnovers in the modern era of basketball?
What's the modern era again?
Let's
that
just
three-point
say
line?
the year 2000 on, the last 22 years.
Okay. You're 2000 on, 10-plus assists, less than 2.5 turnovers.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess it's just Chris Paul.
Just Chris Paul. He's the only player, and he's doing it
Maybe
this year.
Rondo got close one season. I could see that, but just Chris Paul.
Just Chris Paul. In fact, what Chris Paul is doing is the least turnovers. This year, the least turnovers he has done this with at all. And that is the least any player has done since Muggsy Bogues did it in the 93-94 season when basketball was essentially a different sport. And that's Chris Paul. That's what he's doing this season so far. Not to mention, the Suns have the best record in the NBA. The best record in the NBA. Devin Booker's missed 7 games. DeAndre Ayton's missed 17 games. Jay Crowder's missed 6 games. Mm-hmm. Chris Paul has played every single one. So when we're talking about consistency, we're also talking about the guy that's been there that has led this team to the best record in the NBA. In the clutch this season, Chris Paul is plus 64. That's an absurd number. I'm going to say it again. Plus 64. That means the last 5 minutes of the game, when the teams are within 5 points, when Chris Paul is on the court, the Suns have outscored other teams by 64 points in that scenario. And that is an absurd number. And that is with a bunch of different teammates. We saw it with Biyombo. We've seen it with Devin Booker, without Devin Booker, with Cameron Johnson, without Cameron Johnson, with Jay Crowder, without Jay Crowder. All of these guys have been shifted in and out of that lineup, and Chris Paul is at the top of that number because he's been the most important in that stat so far this season. Let me list you some players that are having career highs in efficiency this year on the Suns. DeAndre Ayton, Bismack Biyombo, JaVale McGee, Jalen Smith, and Frank Kaminsky. That's not a coincidence. All 5 of those centers are having career highs in efficiency this year. That is a Chris Paul stat. As good as those players have been, it's not a coincidence that 5 different centers can come to the Suns and have career highs in efficiency. That is just insane that all 5 of those players can do that. And that is a Chris Paul stat to me, as good as those players are. 26 games this season with 10 or more assists, only 17 games with 3 or more turnovers. So way more games with 10 plus assists than games with more than 3 turnovers. Here's a stat that I thought was crazy and I didn't know. He has the highest defensive win shares of any guard in the NBA this season.
That's the steals.
That's the steals, tied with Steph Curry.
His steal numbers are going crazy. Actually, can I throw a stat back at you?
Sure.
He's the only player in NBA history. I just found this today, and I tweeted it out. He's the only player in NBA history age 36 and up to average 2 steals per game.
Yeah, the only player. He has the most steals in the NBA, the most steals overall. He goes back and forth with leading the league in steals per game because there are players like DeJounte Murray from the Spurs that are up there with steals per game, but they don't play as many games as Chris Paul because Chris Paul's played every single game so far this season. Consistency. When Chris Paul plays in the clutch this season, the Suns are outscoring opponents on net rating by plus 45. So 45 points per 100 possessions when Chris Paul is on the floor this season, which is the best in the NBA for anyone that is leading a team like Chris Paul. The only person beyond him in that stat is somebody we're going to talk about in the future, which is Kenrich Williams, which is insane considering he plays on a terrible team. But essentially, Chris Paul, as a leader, has the best net rating in the clutch so far this season. Now, if you want to make the case that Chris Paul's not going to win, I agree with you. He's not going to win. He doesn't have the counting stats. But my case is this. I don't think there's really been any player in the NBA that makes as big of a difference as far as winning games than Chris Paul does this season, because the Suns win more than anyone else, and Chris Paul has played every single one of those games, and nobody else on the Suns has outside of Mikal Bridges, and obviously Chris Paul has a bigger impact than him. And that's really the only case I can make. And I think for Suns fans, they should embrace the fact that he is mentioned in the MVP conversation, because in reality, I think he does deserve it, regardless of what the box score stats say, because box score stats are flawed. Outside of that, he deserves it, in my opinion, at least to be in that conversation.
You said he was missing the counting stats. I mean, honestly, he's only missing one counting stat, and that's points.
And even that, let me just make the case here.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge the Suns face this season is trying to win games while trying to develop the young guys on this roster. That's the number one challenge the Suns had to face this season. And it was the number one challenge that Monty Williams had to face. It was the number one thing that you and I talked about before the season started. And what we didn't factor in was that Chris Paul could find a way to do that while still winning games, because he'll just take 3 quarters off and allow those guys to get their numbers and then turn it on in the fourth quarter over and over and over and over again, snatching victory from the hands of defeat from teams that are about to win over and over and over again, because he's Chris Paul and he's one of the only guys maybe the only guy in the NBA that can do that.
Yeah, it's just a little bit cruel, because it's a sacrifice that we asked Chris Paul to make at the beginning of the season. We said, hey, can you lay off a couple of shots that you took last year on a per-game basis and give those to Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, DeAndre Ayton instead? And so far he said sure. And all of those guys are seeing their scoring outputs increase a little bit. Actually, Mikal's has gone down. So that's another story. But those other guys have seen their scoring averages go up. And it's at the expense of Chris Paul and Chris Paul's MVP case. I don't think that it's just not possible in the modern NBA era to take 11 shots per game like Chris Paul and win MVP. That's what Steve Nash did in 2005, but it's not 2005 anymore. You said it's a different sport from what it was in 93. It's a different sport from what it was in 2005 too. And you're just not going to get MVP with 15 points per game. If he averaged 20, I mean, if Chris Paul averaged 20 and 11 with this efficiency, this few
and the Suns
of
would
a
be
turnover
worse,
average,
right?
And this, yeah, but I mean,
Isn't
if the
that
Suns were still the first seed, that would give him a case.
But doesn't that make the MVP award just seem stupid? If he averaged 20 and 11, but the Suns were 5 games less in the standings, he'd be in the MVP conversation more.
It makes the way that we evaluate basketball on a national level stupid, but we've known that all along.
Exactly. Let me ask you this. This is one question here.
We've always known that.
Yes, it's true. It's true. If you switched, and this is a genuine question, because I don't know the answer to this, and forgive me for not preparing you for this question. If you just switched Chris Paul and Steph Curry right now, just talking about the Warriors.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Just talking about the Warriors. How much worse, let's say you even think they're going to be worse, how much worse do you think the Warriors are this season if you switch them? Obviously, they're going to play different. We're not assuming Chris Paul is going to run around 1,000 screens and play like Steph Curry.
Yeah, they're going to play so different.
They're going to play Chris Paul ball. Let's say they're playing Chris Paul ball. How much worse or what do you think they'll be?
They won't be that much worse.
I don't think so either. If any.
On the condition, because people are going to run with that. Like if you say that just on Twitter in 140 characters, people are going to run with that, and they're going to say you're an idiot. They play completely different, which is true. If you gave them a full summer to train together and do a training camp where they're not going to, like you said, they're not going to run them off 1,000 screens. Draymond is not a role threat. And he's not a pop threat. So that doesn't work in Chris Paul ball. It just doesn't. You could get around it, though, because Kevon Looney would have his best season.
Because Draymond comes around those traps.
Kevon Looney would have the best season of his career. Jordan Poole could still be a movement shooter. Andrew Wiggins could kind of be a hybrid of things, which I guess is what he is anyway.
He'd be Devin Booker light. Right? Klay Thompson would be wide open every time he shoots, which still happens.
And I mean, Chris Paul and Draymond Green on defense together would just kind of be absurd. And like imagine a lineup with Chris Paul and Gary Payton II, where Gary Payton is like the Mikal Bridges role, right? And he's taking the primary assignment, but Chris is there plugging up the passing lanes. Draymond's a free safety. I mean, there's just not really a great way to score on that team. I think bottom line is Chris just doesn't have the will to shoot like Steph does. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that holds that Golden State team back to begin with. So if Andrew Wiggins is suddenly going to have to be a guy you rely on from night to night and take 20 shots, yes, I do think the Warriors would be worse. Would they be that much worse? No, they probably wouldn't be that much worse. And that, yeah, I mean, that speaks to Chris's impact at age 36, which has been insane.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. So more than anything else, I guess people listening to this, hear this as a plea from me to embrace Chris Paul as part of the MVP conversation, even if you understand that there's no chance he's going to win it, because I agree with you. But instead of conceding to the fact that the way that people evaluate NBA players is flawed, maybe try and push back on that a little bit instead, and just acknowledge that what Chris Paul is doing is remarkable, regardless of his age, because I think it is. I genuinely think what he's doing is incredible, and I think that Suns fans will appreciate it so much more once he's gone, but we should appreciate it more right now, because it's insane. You know, watching that Mavericks game, it really clicked for me. Because I'm like, we'll be fine. We'll just be fine. We have Chris Paul. At the end of this game, Chris Paul is going to be Chris Paul for 5 minutes, and then it's going to be over. And that's exactly what happened. So it is a pretty remarkable thing. So shout out to Chris Paul. I think he should be in the MVP conversation. And I didn't say this last year, and I do genuinely believe it so far this year. Do you agree with me now, I guess? Where are we at now?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Look, you make a compelling case. Where is he on the ladder? Though,
I don't know. I guess I don't do that. I don't really do that because who is in the lead right now? Is it back to Giannis? Are we back to Giannis? It's not Steph.
I don't even know at this point, dude. It's not KD either, right? So
it's not KD. He got injured. Yeah.
It's not. Are we back to Giannis?
Jokic could be there. Embiid, and people have been saying Embiid.
Yes, people have been saying Jokic and Embiid.
I mean, if Memphis gets up to the 2 seed somehow, it could be Ja.
I've been avoiding the whole conversation because I'm just like, there's just a lot of kind of middling teams, and how am I supposed to know which one deserves it? Right? That's the weird thing about the conversation this year is that all these middling teams get their candidates,
and the Suns are better than all of them.
Why doesn't the 36-9 team get a candidate?
Yeah.
So to that point, Mike. Well done.
Yeah.
I thought you presented a pretty good case.
All right. I appreciate it.
Let's move on to the Jazz.
The Suns play the Jazz twice this week. Once today, for most of you listening Monday. It's tonight. And then the next one immediately after that on Wednesday. The first game's at home. The second game is in Utah. Right now we know for sure that Donovan Mitchell will not be playing the first game. We don't know the status of DeAndre Ayton, Cameron Payne, and Jay Crowder so far. But this is kind of the first time, it is the first time the Suns are playing the Jazz. So it's the first time that we're going to be able to talk about the Jazz so far this season. The Jazz have been good this year, but in the last 10 games, they're 4-6, and they're kind of falling apart a little bit. What do you think about the Jazz so far in this matchup?
I think the next 2 games are going to be very important for your brand in particular.
Because I predicted they were going to fall apart this season?
Because this is your chance.
Yeah.
This is your chance to truly declare the downfall of the Utah Jazz. And by the way, the Utah Jazz, they're playing Golden State tonight. Don't know the result of that game yet, obviously, because we'll know by the time you listen to this, but we just don't know right now. But then they play Phoenix 2 times in a row, and then they play Memphis. So a very, very, very difficult week for the Utah Jazz, just as they're playing their worst basketball of the season. How do I feel about the Utah Jazz in general? I still think they're very much a threat. I think they're the number 1 offensive rating in the NBA, and they have the number 1 offense for a reason. They have an offense that is not always the most reliable. There's a lot of kind of different outcomes in the range of what's possible with their offense. They have the type of offense that's capable of blowing you out by 40 points because they blitz you with a million threes, or their shots off for the night and then they lose the game. And so how that translates to playoff basketball is obviously something that we've discussed before, and it's a question that people will continue to bring up. But the Jazz have shooters. They will kill you in rotation over and over again. Donovan Mitchell, when he has played, and he won't play on Monday, but he's been great. All of their pull-up shooters are great.
Mike
really
Conley
just comes down.
Yeah.
Mike Conley's been, if you look at his percentages, I actually haven't checked on him in a few weeks, but his pull-up percentages are unfathomably good.
Close to the best in the
insane.
NBA. Yeah.
Another guy who his per game stats are only whatever they are, like 15 points per game or whatever, and you say, well, why doesn't he just shoot the ball a million more times per game? Because he's killing it. It all comes down to defense. The only gripe that Jazz fans have with their own team is on defense. And it's all about Rudy Gobert running the show and everyone else being a pretty shitty point of attack defender. And what type of additional help can they actually bring in at the deadline to help Rudy out on the perimeter in a way that doesn't sacrifice too much of their offense. Joe Ingles is not cutting it. Bojan Bogdanovic is not cutting it. They obviously need changes. I just want to throw out to the people who don't believe that Rudy Gobert has a big impact. How about this for a stat, Mike? The Jazz this year, with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell on the floor together, have a plus 14.6 net rating. That is obviously very, very terrific. With just Gobert, no Mitchell on the floor, they still have a plus 9.5 net rating, which is pretty impressive to me if you think about it, because you're relying on other kind of sometimes questionable offensive options. Mike Conley is good, but is he that good? Jordan Clarkson has been iffy this year. His shot seems to be going a little bit better for him in the past few weeks at least, but he hasn't had the most efficient season coming off of last year. So plus 9.5 with just Gobert, still very good. When it's just Donovan Mitchell and no Rudy Gobert on the floor, so he's playing with Hassan Whiteside or Eric Paschall or Rudy Gay even when he's been healthy, the Jazz then have a negative 0.2 net rating when it's just Donovan Mitchell on the floor and Rudy Gobert is off the floor. Their defensive rating balloons to 113 per 100 possessions. That is bad. That is a very bad defensive rating. So that's what we're talking about with the Jazz. And to that end, I guess this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to you. What does that mean for the Suns, not just in the context of these next two games, but in terms of the playoffs? Play Gobert off the floor, win the series. It's much easier said than done, despite what people may have you believe in the year 2022, I believe. But with the right roster personnel, with the right small ball five options, and the right shooters and spacing, you can absolutely do it. It's an attainable task. I don't necessarily know if the Suns have that personnel on their roster right now, but I definitely think they could go out and acquire the right personnel to give them basically the key that unlocks a Jazz series and more or less ensures that you can have this team's number. What do you think?
Here's a quote from Rudy Gobert. When I watch some of these other teams like the Suns or the Warriors, those guys are a step ahead of us in terms of winning habits. They take every game personally. Devin Booker is playing his ass off defensively. I've been watching him compared to 2 years ago. Guys like that, they buy in, and you can tell they take pride in playing defense and stopping their man, doing whatever they can defensively to stop the other team and be a part of a winning culture. I think we're not there yet, but I think we're going to get there. It's up to the Suns to make sure that they don't get there, because they have an opportunity 2 games in a row to put their foot on their throats, just as you said, and take all of the steam out of them that they can, because right now, once again, 4-6 in their last 10. 4-6 in their last 10. You talked about them having the number one offense, and that's true. They did have the number one offense so far this year. But in the last 10 games, they don't. In fact, the number one offense is, actually, believe it or not, the Brooklyn Nets. And number 2 in the last 10 games, the Phoenix Suns. That's the Bismack Biyombo effect right there. Because he's been amazing. But the Jazz have dropped all the way down to 10th in their defensive rating in the last 10 games. Even when Gobert has played 9 of those 10 games, is all the way down at 23. The Suns, this would have been a much more interesting matchup earlier in the season. When, one, they were healthy. I'll give them credit. They're dealing with injuries, Donovan Mitchell included. But right now, they are not at their peak. They are not playing at their peak. And the Suns need to put it on them in order to remind them who the Suns are and give them an opportunity to be kind of sad here. Especially the Jazz fans.
I think Suns fans also, we should remember, have good cause for optimism here if you just look at the season series last year, because these teams have not changed that much. I mean, Rudy Gay is cool. He's a cool acquisition. JaVale McGee, Landry Shamet, that's cool. But for the most part, these are the same teams. And the Suns won the season series against the Jazz last year 3-0. In fact, Donovan Mitchell even scored 41 points in one of those games. They still lost. The Suns beat them pretty handedly, I think, in 2 of the 3 games. In the third one, I think it was close, a 3 or 4 point win. So you should feel pretty good about these, I think, if you're a Suns fan. What is an 0-4 week? I mean, like I said, toughest possible competition for Utah this week. What would an 0-4 week do to their morale? You talk about the Suns stepping on their throats.
Right.
If they go 0-4, we might have some of those Utahns turning to alcoholism.
And you already got Rudy Gobert subtweeting Donovan Mitchell by talking about Devin Booker's defense, which, by the way,
Yeah.
was just perfect for Suns fans as far as their own players fighting with each other and using Devin Booker as an example of somebody who gives all-out effort all the time. It's as good as it gets for us, but they're already doing that, and they could fall apart even further. The Suns still do enter the game without two guys, or at least two guys, probably three. So that's tough.
I mean, Donovan is always like just one or two public comments from a Utah State legislator away from requesting the trade officially anyway, I think.
Yeah,
so.
I expected that by the end of the season. In this next offseason, I expected him to want to be gone. So that would be great. That would be great for me. It's not the best timing as far as my future that I thought of a backcourt of Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker, because we got the guy that's in the MVP conversation now. But it still would be great to get him maybe to the East where he wants to play, like New York. But yeah, it's tough because Donovan Mitchell's been really good this year too. That's the other part of this conversation. We're talking about them playing this game without their best player offensively, no doubt, but probably their best player overall. You know, the impact that Gobert makes, of course, but Donovan's been very good.
He's been great, but
yeah,
it is a little like you do relish a little bit in the fact that the defense narratives have flipped, right?
Yeah. And rightfully,
also,
and it should have been last year. We talked about it last year. It should have happened last year. We did talk about it last year,
but also not only do you relish in that, as good as Donovan has been as the alpha dog scorer, he does need to share in some of the responsibility, some of the brunt of the blame. In being, you know, compared to Devin Booker, the more athletic, the better quick twitch athlete who is not putting in the necessary effort on defense to make the impact that Jazz fans and Jazz coaches, everyone expect from him. So he definitely shares in some of that blame. And as a Suns fan, that is just one more element, one more narrative into that story that's kind of fun.
Well, yeah, it's especially fun because Devin Booker is better than Donovan Mitchell on defense, and DeAndre Ayton is better than Rudy Gobert on offense. So they got him on both sides of that, which is kind of fun. But yes, if you're listening to this now, before the game on Monday, we will be doing that game live on playback through our Patreon. Join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thetimeline. You get to hear us do analysis on that game live. I'm very, very, very excited about that one. Would really appreciate a Suns win. And then, of course, the away game will be the game on Wednesday, and we'll be back with the Patreon podcast after that game. You got anything else on the Jazz before we call this one, Sam?
That is all I have on the Jazz. I'm just super excited for it.
Yes, we appreciate you guys. We'll be back very, very soon.